Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. That phone call changed everything. It was an ordinary Tuesday, and time seemed to freeze, slower than a snail climbing a steep hill, as Ethan sat in his office, sipping lukewarm coffee that tasted as sickening as burnt cardboard. His eyes were glued to a spreadsheet, a document he'd double-checked 3 times already, the numbers as dense as a swarm of lifeless ants. The ceiling fan overhead buzzed like a lazy summer afternoon fly, monotonous and constant. The inbox flashed with hints of unread emails, but he wasn't ready to face them. Just then, the cell phone on the table vibrated. A name popped up on the screen, making Ethan blink furiously. Malik. His brother. The brothers weren't exactly close, and weekday contact was rare. Malik was far away in Hawaii, running a jaw-droppingly luxurious resort, the kind of place where tourists were willing to fly thousands of miles just to take a picture and post it on social media. Their calls usually only happened on birthdays or the occasional holiday greeting, and it was definitely unusual to get a call from him on a weekday afternoon like this. A flicker of unease swept through Ethan's mind as he scratched the screen to answer, already sensing something strange. "Hey, little old me," came Malik's voice, casual as ever. "What is it, Malik?" asked Ethan, leaning back in his chair and waiting for the next step. The air in the office seemed to grow heavy. There was a brief silence. "Let me ask you something," Malik's voice trailed off. "Where is your wife?" Ethan blinked again, a sense of foreboding intensifying. "She's traveling on business," he answered with some hesitation. "In New York. Left on Sunday. What's going on?" There was another silence, longer than a moment ago. "Are you sure?" Malik's tone changed, no longer the careless casualness it had been, nor was it a joke. "Why do you ask?" Ethan's voice tensed involuntarily, and he sat up straight. "Because," Malik sighed, his voice lowering a bit, "I'm standing in the lobby of this resort right now, and I swear on my mother's honor, your wife, Isabel, she's right here in front of me, just checked in with another man." The whole world seemed to stand still for an instant. Ethan thought he must have misheard. The hum of the office ceiling fan, the faint noise of the computer running, all disappeared at this moment, leaving only a sharp chirping deep in his eardrums. "She's here," Malik reconfirmed, his voice lower with a sense of incredulous absurdity. "Barefoot, wearing a beach dress, and the guy next to her looks like a model from a cologne commercial. And she just used your ATM card to pay for the honeymoon suite." Ethan felt himself stop breathing. His hand froze on the mouse, his fingertips cold. The coffee in his mouth suddenly became as rough and hard to swallow as sand. He stared blankly at the monitor, the spreadsheet on the screen having lost any meaning. Jaw muscles tightened, but he miraculously steadied his voice. "Are you sure it's her?" "100% sure," Malik replied decisively. "I even waved at her, and she waved back at me before following the guy upstairs." Silence spread once more, like thick ink, soaking Ethan's sanity. He rubbed his temples, trying to dispel the sharp headache that had just formed behind his eyes. "Okay," he said slowly, each word seeming to be squeezed through his teeth. "Don't say anything else to her. Don't let her know you told me." "Understood," Malik responded immediately. "Is there anything I can do?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His heart was beating frantically in his chest, almost crashing through his ribs, but his thoughts were rapidly cooling and becoming as sharp as ice. He got up from his desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the leaves rustling in the wind. A storm raged in his head. Isabel, his wife of 6 years. They met at a work seminar when they were both still obscure and minor players. She was like a bolt of lightning, sharp, confident, the kind of woman who never waited for someone to open a door for her, but would kick it in herself. They hit it off right away. He paid for her last semester of graduate school after her loan application was denied. He supported her unreservedly as she started her own small design firm from nothing. He celebrated each of her successes as if they were his own wins. And now she was thousands of miles away, snuggled in the arms of another man, smiling on a sunny beach, as if nothing between them had ever existed, as if all those years together, all that support and love he'd given, were as light as a feather, as if they were nothing. After a few more explanations, Ethan hung up the phone with Malik and sat back heavily in his chair. He opened their online banking app. The transaction history was laid bare before him like an indictment. $850, ocean view room rate. $170, champagne brunch. $265, deluxe couples massage. $320, catamaran sunset cruise. $2,430, total, stolen pleasures. Every purchase was like a dagger in his chest. Paid for with his card. Over the past few months, he did sense that something was off. Isabel started canceling their date nights more often, always saying that she was too tired and stressed from work. When he tried to approach her, she would unconsciously flinch. She used vague excuses to avoid in-depth conversations. Ethan blamed it on the stress of the early days of her business. He didn't press the issue and gave her space. As a result, the space he gave her became a breeding ground for her to cheat. He wanted to scream and tear everything in front of him apart, but he didn't. He wanted to sweep the table viciously to the floor, but he didn't either. He just sat there in silence, feeling a numbness as his brain raced to process the sudden flood of information. Because in that moment, he realized something dangerous. He won't go yelling. He's not going to lose his voice. He wants revenge. He wouldn't immediately fly to Hawaii and storm into the hotel to question her. He wouldn't storm into her suite and swing at the man's face. That was something she would have expected, something she might have been prepared for. But Ethan, will sit down, think, plan. By the time Isabel realizes what's happening, she won't even understand how she got knocked down. He picked up the phone again and called Malik. "Keep watching her," he said in a hushed voice, "and tell me her every move. If you can do it without being seen, take some pictures and send them to me." "No problem," Malik agreed. He always seemed to be happy to get involved in a little drama, and this time, the two brothers were on the same page. Then Ethan called his assistant and told her he wouldn't be in the office for the rest of the week. He closed his laptop, walked over to the home bar, poured a glass of whiskey, and then sat down on the couch in the living room, his eyes falling on their wedding picture above the fireplace. He remembered the way she had laughed that day, the way her voice had trembled slightly as she had said "forever" when she had pronounced her vows. He realized now that when some people said "forever," they meant until the next more attractive thing comes along. He gently knocked his teeth against the wall of the glass. She thought he was a fool, thought he'd never notice. But she'd forgotten who he was. She'd forgotten that Ethan was a detail-oriented man who could see patterns, whose life was built on structure and precision. She played a careless game in heaven, and now it was his turn to show her that betrayal had consequences. Hawaii will be a place she will never forget. Paradise, about to be exposed. The strangest thing about this thing called betrayal is that it doesn't crush you instantly. It seeps in like cold water, silently, under a doorway, slowly and imperceptibly at first, until you realize you're standing in a flood of water, cold and stinging, with nowhere to run. That night, Ethan sat alone in his darkened living room, letting the coldness soak him completely. The only sounds in the room were the crisp clink of ice cubes against glasses and the creak of the ceiling fan overhead as it slowly turned. He opened his bank statement again, scrolling through the shocking entries like a crime scene report. Couple spa packages, sunset cruises, enough room service to feed a football team. Signed his last name on every receipt, using his money to fund their fantasy. She took everything they had built together and turned it into a vacation fund for her to elope with her lover. But he wouldn't act recklessly. At least not now. He dialed Malik's number again. "Describe the guy to me," Ethan said as he poured himself another drink. A soft chuckle came from Malik on the other end of the line, not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity of the whole thing. Tall, model build. You know the type, shows up at the beach in skinny jeans and Louboutins like he's allergic to sand. Earlier in the day, Isabel gave him a kiss on the cheek and took his hand. They looked too close to be co-workers by any means. Ethan closed his eyes. Malik was right. His instincts had already told him that it wasn't a business trip. Isabel's emails had become more and more vague lately. No more specific "back on Wednesday" or "meeting with a client at 3 p.m., but only one or two-word replies or simply ghostly silence. Instead of specific "back on Wednesday" or "meeting with client at 3 p.m., the emails were short one or two-word replies or just ghostly silence. He had told himself that she was just stressed out and needed space. He gave her space, and she took that space and flew all the way to Hawaii. "Thanks, bro," Ethan said. "Keep an eye on her. Don't let her know you told me anything." "Already on it," Malik replied. "By the way, She booked the room under your full name. No shame in that at all. Of course she doesn't. After hanging up the phone, Ethan sat in silence in the darkness for a long time again. He remembered a lot of things. Thinking about how Isabel used to wait for him to come home when he worked late. Thinking about how she used to be amused by his lame jokes. At some point, her laughter faded, and he couldn't even remember when it happened. Maybe he just subconsciously didn't want to notice. Fly to Hawaii immediately, storm their suite, and catch them red-handed. The thought burned his chest like strong acid. He visualized the scene, but immediately afterward, he imagined Isabel's reaction. She'd probably shriek, cry, beg, deny, maybe even turn things upside down and turn the tables on him, saying he'd invaded her privacy, twisting things around to his lack of trust in her, turning the victim into the aggressor. Nope. He needed her to be revealed, but not just to him alone, but to everyone. That means no yelling, no dropping things, no creating drama. Just facts. Cold, hard, irrefutable facts. He pulled up all the transaction records from their shared bank account. Each transaction was clearly marked like breadcrumbs, a path to betrayal. He created a new spreadsheet because he needed this thing to be organized, cold, and as precise as surgery. He meticulously labeled each entry by date, location, description, and amount. It wasn't hard to tell which were her purchases. She loved those extravagant gadgets. Candlelit dinners, imported wines, spa facials with names that sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. And worst of all, it was all happening as his account balance continued to dwindle. He felt like a ghost, watching from the sidelines as his life was squandered. Ethan stayed up all night that night. He sat right next to the center island in the kitchen, lit only by the faint light of the refrigerator. He drew up a plan. He would not let her leave Hawaii with a bronzed skin and a satisfied smile. She had come with betrayal and would surely return with a legal storm. The next morning, he texted Malik. Can you stall her tomorrow morning? Tell her the room got upgraded for free, or there's some VIP beach experience or something. Anyway, buy me some time. A few seconds later, Malik replied, small matter. Wrapped up in me. What are you planning, huh? Ethan replied, I'm sick of the silence. Then he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Joan. They'd gone to college together, and Joan was the kind of person who could hack into a vending machine and make it drop free snacks. Now she's a cybersecurity consultant for a law firm and occasionally takes on private work. When Ethan explains to her what she needs, she doesn't even hesitate for a second. I'll send you a tracker link to a real-time spending log, Joan said dryly. Give me access to the shared account, and I'll import all the information into a private form. Can you match the GPS location? Ethan pursued. Joan laughed. You want a time, a place, and a specific situation? No problem. Get it done by tonight. Thank you, Joan. I will reward you handsomely. You're welcome, she said. I love a good revenge story. Hanging up the phone, Ethan smiled for the first time in hours. Because now, this wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about taking back control. He texted Malik again. Send me a picture. Just one. An hour later, a photo came through. Isabel and the man were standing near a beach bar. She was holding a coconut drink with a small pink umbrella stuck in it. Her expensive sunglasses casually perched on top of her head, her hair cascading down her back, and one hand resting gently on the man's chest. Ethan zoomed in on the photo. There wasn't a trace of guilt on her face, not a hint of shame, just a big smile. It was at that moment that something inside Ethan snapped completely. The man who had been trusting, loyal, and perhaps a little too forgiving was gone. In his place was a calm, focused, calculating man. He saved the photo and added it to a folder called Paradise Files. Next, he began collecting copies of all of Isabel's recent emails and text messages. She had used her work email address to send travel confirmations to the man's private email address and had carelessly CC'd herself. Ethan pulled up every e-receipt, every itinerary, every piece of evidence that proved her lies. Then he contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. He needed someone licensed to practice law in Hawaii. Malik gave him a name, Tony Rivera. A civil attorney, sharp as glass, with a reputation for taking down the big boys with nothing more than a file folder and a raised eyebrow. Ethan sends the evidence he's gathered to Tony via encrypted email, and 30 minutes later, they have a video call. I don't just want a divorce, Ethan told her, his tone quiet but firm. I want to file a financial claim. fraudulent use of funds, emotional damages. I want the summons served on her while she's still in Hawaii. Tony raised one eyebrow. You're not messing around. I don't fool around anymore. Ethan said. She nodded. Send me everything. I'll draft the pleadings. When will you arrive? Ethan hesitated. I haven't booked a flight yet. Well, she smiled slightly. You'd better hurry then. Heaven, it doesn't stay quiet forever. After the call ended, Ethan closed his computer and leaned back to look at the photo again. Isabel thought she was having the time of her life, but she hadn't the slightest idea that he was about to turn her paradise into a courtroom. He wasn't just going to expose her. He was prepared to bury her fantasies openly, legally, and with precision. And he, in turn, will be watching closely as it happens. Growing up, Ethan and Malik were never really close friends. They were just two boys living under the same roof with very different mindsets and different paths in life. Malik loved the beach and the ocean breeze, while Ethan favored books and a well-organized balance sheet. While Ethan stays stateside and builds a quiet life on his own, Malik travels to Hawaii and transforms a dilapidated beachfront property into a headline-grabbing luxury resort. There are no arguments between them, but they also lack a deep connection, at least until this incident. Betrayal has a strange power to rearrange the order of loyalties between people. 2 days had passed since Malik's fateful phone call, and Ethan had parked his car on a cliffside lookout on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where people usually came to think about life or to let their voices out when no one else was around. In the distance was the vastness of the ocean, taking on a cold, gray, unforgiving hue. The screen of the cell phone in his hand glowed eerily. Well, came Malik's voice on the other end of the line. Here's the information I got. Malik has thrown himself wholeheartedly into investigating and obtaining evidence for his brother, with the kind of dedication that only comes when blood really means some kind of bond. The booking information is all in your name, he began to report. She booked the honeymoon suite for 6 nights. Payment confirmed through your joint bank card. All-inclusive service, champagne welcome gift, nightly bed service, ocean view room. Ethan closed his eyes. Send me the file. It's already in your mailbox, Malik said, and I pulled some security footage. The angles are hidden enough that they won't invade privacy, but enough to prove that they're by no means just co-workers. Are you sure? Ethan asked through clenched teeth. Believe me, Malik's tone was positive. They were kissing and putting their arms around each other by the pool bar. I even saw them dancing together at the Hawaiian dinner last night. A twinge twisted Ethan's stomach. She was actually at Malik's resort, dancing with another man. Did she say anything to you? Ethan asked, wondering if she'd tried to lie in front of his brother. Nope, just smiled as if everything was normal. She didn't even blink when I greeted her. She said she was just here on vacation to relieve her work stress. I didn't show anything different. Well done, Ethan said. What about the guy? What's his story? Malik exhaled through the receiver. Name's Julian. I had a couple employees ask around. Seems to be an executive at a marketing firm in California. 35, 6 years old. Works out a lot. Lifts his hands like he's God's gift to women. Perfect, Ethan cooed under his breath. It was like the cliché of clichés. Do you need me to dig deeper? No, Ethan said. I've got someone else to help in that area. He did look for it. Joan. She had sent Ethan a Google form, marked in different colors and well-organized, documenting every purchase Isabel had made using their joint account since arriving in Hawaii, down to the timestamp. It even included GPS coordinates to track the stores and restaurants she had patronized. The form read like a travel brochure from hell, and his name was boldly written on every entry. Ethan's next step is to tighten the envelope. He needed more than an emotional blow. He needed legal grounds. So he contacted Joan again. Hey, she answered the phone quickly. Your form is updated. You should look at line 35. Ethan immediately opens the form. Item, fine jewelry set. Amount, $860. Remarks, gift wrapped. Signed by Mrs. Future. Handwriting confirmed to match Isabel's. Ethan's grip on his cell phone tightened abruptly. She'd used his card to buy the man a gift. Joan didn't say anything. She didn't have to speak. Keep tracking. Ethan's voice was icy. I need every penny documented. I need a complete timeline. I want to know what they touched, where they lived, what they wore. You're becoming dangerous. Joan's tone was half teasing, half marveling. No, Ethan replied. I'm getting smart. After hanging up, he contacted Tony Rivera, a civil attorney recommended by Malik, who was savvy, prompt, and completely unfazed by the drama. I've read the documents you sent, Tony said, getting right to the point during their second call, and you have a strong case. Fraudulent use of joint funds, emotional distress, misrepresentation. If you want to file a lawsuit or serve a subpoena while she's still on the island, I can have all the papers ready for you in 48 hours. That's it. But just so you're clear, Tony cautiously warned, this could be publicized. I don't care. That night, Malik sent the video clips to Ethan via encrypted email. The first clip had soft music playing in the background from the resort's live band. The camera angle showed Isabel and the man, Julian, swaying in each other's arms under string lights, his hand on her waist. She moves closer to him and whispers something in his ear. He smiles, and then, right in the middle of the dance floor, she kisses him. It was on the same dance floor where Ethan had danced with Isabel 3 years ago at an in-house resort reception hosted by Malik. Back then, she would still offer to hold his hand in public, and back then, she still looked at him with love in her eyes, as if he was her world. Ethan turned off the video, not out of pain, but out of a decided certainty. He'd suffered enough being kept in the dark. It was no longer about heartbreak. It was business. She'd turned their marriage into a transaction, so he'd treat the end of this farce as a contractual breach. Anything else? Malik asked when Ethan called again to confirm. I need to get into her suite, Ethan said, not break in. Just gathering a little information. Malik hesitated. It's kind of stepping into a gray area. She used my name and my card to open the room. Ethan's tone was undeniable. I have a right to know what's going on under my account. I may have a candidate, Malik said slowly. His name is Kai. He's been with me for 6 years, very discreet, loyal, and reliable. I trust him. Send him in quietly. Don't take anything. Just observe. Understood. As the plan took shape, Ethan began drafting a master document. He named it Operation Island Exit. It contained bank statements, screenshots of emails, a timeline of lies, photos and videos from Malik, spreadsheets created by Joan, legal pleadings drafted by Tony, all neatly filed in a folder on an encrypted hard drive. The evidence is overwhelming. The betrayal is a fact. But until now, Ethan hadn't made a single phone call to Isabel. She had no knowledge of what was about to happen. This silence is Ethan's favorite part, because there's an ineffable sense of power in watching someone take a step into the fire, but still think they're basking in the sunshine. They're sipping champagne, posting beach photos, and smiling in the mirror. All the while, the ground beneath them is quietly beginning to crumble. By the end of this weekend, it will no longer be soft sand under her feet. Instead, it's a cold courtroom. There's something deeply satisfyingly pleasurable about watching a liar walk right into an elaborate trap with a smile on his face. And in Ethan's bureau, the trap comes with an unrivaled ocean view and free mimosas. Ethan arrived in Honolulu just before noon on Friday. He stepped off the plane with only a carry-on suitcase, dark sunglasses, and a pseudonym. He booked his hotel under the pseudonym Mr. Hayes, a name he used long ago when he played fantasy football leagues. Ironic, now that I think about it, that identity, unlike his marriage, is still intact. He didn't stay at Malik's resort. That would have been too risky. Instead, he checked in at a boutique hotel a few blocks away, the kind of place that boasts eco-luxury and doesn't ask questions if you tip well and look tired enough. He keeps a low profile, making no high-profile phone calls or public appearances, just observing, coordinating, and keeping quiet. Later that evening, Malik met him at a small cafe near the marina. Malik blended in perfectly with the tourists in his flip-flops and linen shirt. Ethan, on the other hand, hadn't even changed out of the clothes he'd worn while traveling. He wasn't here to relax. She's still playing the perfect guest, Malik said as he took a sip of his drink. She and the guy booked a kayaking trip for 2 tomorrow morning. Ordered with my card? Ethan asked. Malik nodded. There was a spa program added at 2 in the afternoon. She swiped that card like a prince, spending money. She didn't suspect a thing? There's no sign of it. She's completely immersed in her own world. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the boats docked at the pier. The setting sun was molten gold, leaping across the water like a flowing flame. It should have been a romantic sight, but at the moment it felt like a countdown. "Okay," Ethan said. "Let's get started. Introduce me to that lawyer friend of yours." The next morning, Malik arranged a secret meeting with Tony Rivera. Her office overlooked a corner of Diamondback Mountain. She greeted Ethan with a strong handshake and an undeniable confidence that made it clear that she rarely lost a case. "I've carefully studied the documents you've provided," she said, pointing to the thick folder Ethan had brought with him. "And you have a strong case. Financial misconduct, fraudulent use of common funds, and emotional distress damages. More importantly, we can file a lawsuit here. But if you want to hit a little harder," Tony added, "we'll just wait until she's halfway through the game, so she thinks everything's perfect. Then we'll give her the killing blow." Ethan nodded. "Make her feel invulnerable, then remind her that she isn't." Tony laughed. "I love clients like that." That afternoon, Ethan returned to his hotel and checked the latest updates sent by Joan. There were quite a few more additions to the spreadsheet. More dinners, jewelry, a private snorkeling trip. One of the transactions was labeled Lover's Cove Picnic Basket, Premium Edition. The entry stung Ethan, not because of the money, but because 2 years ago, they'd had the exact same picnic. It had been Isabel's idea then. Now the romance was being recycled and given away. He closed his laptop and called Malik. "It's time for the next step," he said. "Switching cards?" Malik asked. "Yes. Can Kai handle it?" Kai was Malik's right-hand man, quiet and rock-solid, the kind of guy you could trust to take a secret to the grave, and Malik had said that Kai had restored some of the power when a hurricane had knocked it out, using only duct tape and a screwdriver. "I'll clear it with him tonight," Malik replied, "and do it tomorrow morning when she comes down for breakfast. Tell him to be quick, clean, and no mistakes." The plan was simple. Malik would create a billing problem at the front desk that would require Isabel's physical presence, with excuses such as a room pre-authorization error. While she's downstairs arguing with the staff, Kai enters the suite, replaces the real ATM card in her wallet with a blank one that looks exactly the same, and leaves without leaving a trace. When she tried to use the card later that day, she would find that it didn't work at all. Her seemingly perfect vacation would come crashing down one step at a time. Each failed swipe was a reminder that control was slipping away. When the sun rose the next day, everything had gone according to plan. Around 10 in the morning, Malik called. "She's at the front desk right now," he whispered, while wearing a fake smile on his face at his employees. "Where's Kai?" "It's already in." Like a ghost, silently. Ethan flashed a sneer. "Perfect." Later that afternoon, Joan sent a message. There was no activity recorded on Zenka after 10:13 a.m. "Looks like the bait has taken effect." It was at that moment that Ethan finally felt the shift and the scales began to tip in his favor. He imagined Isabel standing at the register of some boutique, sunglasses in one hand, disappointment spreading across her lips as the cashier shook her head and said, "Card declined." Swipe again. Still declined. Confused. Embarrassed. Panic. Malik confirms this. "They went to that jewelry store in Waikiki," he said, "and she tried to buy a gold chain, and the card was rejected. Tried again, and it still didn't work. That Julian looked confused, and she looked furious. Now they're back at the resort. She's on the phone to someone. Probably the bank. Or maybe it's you." Ethan let out a soft laugh. Let her fight. Of course he didn't pick it up. He wasn't ready. He was going to keep her in this torment a little longer. But that's not all. Ethan wrote a short sentence on a white sticky note and sealed it into an envelope. Then he printed out the clearest screenshot he could of her and Julian kissing on the beach and put it in as well. There was only one line on the note. "Smile. Your vacation is over." That evening, he handed the envelope to Malik in the hotel lobby. "Give this to her tomorrow morning. Give it to her personally. Say it was left by a personal guest, then turn around and leave." Malik turned the envelope over and weighed it. "She'll break down." That's exactly the purpose. That night, Ethan returned to his quiet hotel room. He stood by the window, watching the waves lap against the reef, and thought about the man he'd been a week ago. The man who was blind, tired, and trying to fix something that had been broken long ago. Now, he was no longer trying to fix anything. He just wanted to make sure that, on this rubble, there was his signature. Malik called the next morning with a hint of a teasing smile. "She opened the envelope in the breakfast lounge," he said, and turned instantly pale, as if someone had suddenly jerked the chair out from under her. Julian asked her what it was, and she said it was nothing. Then she went back to her suite in a rage. Ethan smiled, looking out the window at the rising sun. Very nice. She's going to explode soon, Malik added. She's broken out, Ethan said calmly. She just doesn't know it yet. He hung up the phone, finished his coffee, and zipped up his suitcase. It was time to go home. Not because it was over, but because the real show was about to begin and she, still unaware that the cameras had long since started rolling. After a perfect layout, there is always a special silence that accompanies it. It is not empty, but full of tension, like the dull air before a storm, or the suffocating silence of a courtroom before a verdict is delivered. The morning after Malik delivered the envelope, Ethan reveled in that silence. A thick, waiting silence. Without prodding, he let the clock tick away its mission. The first call came in at 11:03 a.m. Isabel. Ethan watched her name flash on his cell phone screen. He didn't move a muscle, letting the ringer go off. Then the second, the third. He put the phone on silent and snapped it back against the bar. His hands were steady, his breathing steady. He'd imagined this scene, her collapse, countless times, but nothing could compare to the thrilling thrill of witnessing her world sink slowly beneath her in real time. Over the next 2 hours, she called 6 more times. Ethan didn't answer once. Meanwhile, Joan kept sending real-time updates from the bank card tracker, or rather, updates from the tracking tracker that was going nowhere. Another rejection. She messaged at 12:12 p.m., this time at a beachside cafe. She tried 3 times. The beauty of well-planned revenge is that it doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't slam doors or make hysterical accusations. It simply whispers the truth where lies once resided. Such is the case with this card-switching operation. Rather than a classic retaliation, it was a revelation. A failed card swipe is a truth revealed. By mid-afternoon, Malik texted, she's at the front desk questioning everyone as to why her card won't work. She thinks it's a mistake in the hotel system. Let her go, Ethan replied. He imagined Isabel standing there in that pricey beach dress, trying to maintain a smile while confusion spread across her face. Julian was probably standing nearby, arms crossed, wondering what the hell she was hiding. Ethan wondered if Julian knew that the room they were staying in was booked under Ethan's name. Had he noticed that every time Isabel signed a receipt, she used the same last name that she'd sworn she'd never be proud of again? But the best part is yet to come. Ethan prepared a second envelope. This one was heavier, thicker, and stuffed with the truth. Inside the envelope, he placed a printed bank statement, each line of spending related to their trip highlighted. A spreadsheet, organized by Joan, detailed by date, location, and expense. A room reservation confirmation from the resort with his full name clearly printed on it. A copy of the divorce papers drafted by Tony. And finally, a clearly labeled USB flash drive. The flash drive that held all the video footage Malik had collected. Their slow dance steps, clasped hands, laughter under the tiki torches, kisses by the bar, all with date and time stamps, in HD resolution. It's more than just evidence. It was a story, a timeline of betrayal woven with facts, and it was about to fall directly into her hands. Later that evening, Ethan made one last phone call to Malik. Are you sure you want to do this? Malik asked, though the answer was already in his tone. She's spending my money on a vacation, Ethan said, and she can afford a wake-up call. The next morning, Malik found Isabel in the hotel lobby. Just like last time, Malik said later, and Ethan could almost picture the scene. Mrs. Thorne, Malik addressed. Ethan laughed when he heard this, surprised she hadn't corrected him. She'd gotten so used to the disguise that she'd even forgotten to take off the mask. A guest left this for you, Malik said, handing her the thick envelope. Isabel took it unsuspectingly. 20 minutes later, my cell phone rang again, Malik continued. This time, an unknown number. I didn't answer it. Then Malik called. She opened the envelope in the suite, he said. I didn't see her in person, but one of the cleaners said he heard her throw something at the wall. Then she started yelling Julian. He left the room 10 minutes later, Malik added, looking like he'd been slapped hard. Did she chase it out? Nope. She slammed the door. He walked to the pool bar alone and asked for a tequila at 10 in the morning. It's almost poetic. Ethan can picture Julian standing there in his beach shirt, staring blankly at the waves, suddenly realizing he's nothing more than a prop in someone else's chaotic life. realizing that everything she'd promised him, freedom, love, adventure, was built on stolen money and borrowed names. Later that evening, Ethan received a call from Tony. "She's been officially served," she said, "with the divorce papers, the financial claim, and all the supporting evidence. We have the signed papers. She knows she's been caught, and the lawsuit has been filed. We'll follow up when she returns to the mainland. But based on the video and your bank records, the case is solid." Ethan thanked her and hung up. That night, he didn't celebrate, didn't raise a glass to his victory or call his friends to brag about it. He just stood on the balcony of his hotel room, watching the tide come in and listening to the sound of the waves gently lapping against the sand. He remembered it all. 6 years of marriage, countless sacrifices, those quiet nights when he'd stayed up late helping her revise her business plan. Thinking of the way she leaned her head on his shoulder when she couldn't sleep. Those bits and pieces that made up life. And how she destroyed it all, one by one, for a man who couldn't even pay for his own drinks. Right now, somewhere, in another hotel suite, she must be pacing, panicking, fumbling to call her bank, her lawyer, anyone who will listen. But the truth is, no one can help her now. She betrayed the only person who would truly support her. She mistakes kindness for weakness. When she decides to treat their marriage like a game, she forgets one important thing. When Ethan learns the rules of the game, he never admits defeat. And now, he writes the rules. By the next morning, she had checked out. Malik texted. She left in a hurry. Didn't talk to anyone. "Julian is gone too." "Good," Ethan replied. That afternoon, Ethan boarded his return flight. No first class, no upgrades. He didn't need luxuries. He had peace. Sometimes peace is more valuable than anything money can buy. He sat in the window seat and watched the clouds roll in, feeling more relaxed than he had at any time in months. There were still battles ahead, court hearings, property division, settlement talks. But the toughest part is behind him. She saw the truth. She tasted powerlessness. She will always remember that the man she tried to deceive was not the fool she thought he was. He was the one who made the last move. At 5:41 a.m., Ethan's cell phone rang again. He'd just gotten home the night before, tossed his bags by the door, and walked right into the bathroom without even turning on a single light. He needed to wash away the scent of Hawaii, the smell of betrayal, the lingering feeling of dirt mixed with sea air and lies. He hadn't even unpacked his suitcase yet, which sat there alone and untouched against the bedroom wall. And his cell phone, set to silent vibrate mode, was buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up, displaying the caller's name, Isabel. Ethan let it ring. Once and again. She made 9 calls in less than 20 minutes before he finally picked up the phone and scratched the answer button. He didn't speak at first, just letting the weight of silence pass through the line to her. "Hello." Her voice came, thin and hesitant. Ethan remained silent. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice sounding tired and raspy from what sounded like a full night's sleep. Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm, even a little cold. "Home." There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could hear background noise, slamming doors, maybe footsteps. She was probably pacing. You went home," she repeated, disbelief in her tone. "Why? What happened?" Ethan could almost picture her trying to make sense of it, but none of the scenarios she had preconceived in her mind could explain the reality she was about to face. "Why can't I use my card anymore?" She finally couldn't resist questioning, her voice rising in desperation. "Why was it declined at every store yesterday? I called the bank, and they said the card was frozen. Is it you? Are you doing something? Did I do something?" Ethan repeated slowly, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. "That's funny. Look," she began sharply, explaining the whole thing. "I know how it looks, but it's not." "Stop it," Ethan interrupted. She immediately went quiet. Ethan stood at the window of his house, looking out at the neighborhood that was just beginning to wake up. The sprinklers on the lawn are starting to tick, and early morning runners are passing by with headphones on, completely unaware that, at this very moment, a marriage is being dissected piece by piece via this phone call. "You told me you were in New York," Ethan said flatly, "and you packed your suitcase, kissed me goodbye, and said you were going to meet a client downtown." "I was at," she lied. "You're not," Ethan said firmly. "You're in Hawaii, at my brother's resort, with another man." He heard her suck in a sharp breath of cold air. "And you used my card," he continued, his voice still low and cold. Every cocktail, every massage, every dinner, every room service charge, you swiped it in my name. You booked rooms in my name. You were in a bed with another man in a suite I paid for. Wait, she stammered. It's not. Not like that. Stop lying, Belle. I wasn't trying to hurt you. She retorted sternly, desperation making her voice start to crack. It was a mistake. It just happened. You planned this trip. A dead silence. You bought the airfare. You forwarded the itinerary to him. You used my money to do it all. That's not a mistake, Belle. That's a choice. He let the words hang in the air, heavy. She didn't respond. You don't understand, she finally whispered. I've been feeling so lost and alone. You've been distant, and you're always working. No. Ethan interrupted her. Don't do that. Don't blame me for what I do. Don't use loneliness as a passport to betrayal. You could have talked to me. You could have told me something was wrong. But you didn't. You chose to pack your bags, smile at me, and fly off to heaven to play house with someone else. There was no room for defense. She knew. Her voice choked. Please? I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. It's just that the situation has gotten complicated. I'm confused. You weren't confused when you booked the luxury suite. You weren't confused when you used my card to buy him a necklace. She sucked in a breath of cold air. How did you? You know that. I know everything, Ethan said. Every purchase, every location, every video, every lie. She was completely silent now. Did you really think you were going to get away with this? Ethan asked. You think I'm going to sit here and let you access our accounts and go on vacation with someone else? She stammered. I needed something different. I didn't plan on hurting you, I swear. I still love you. Ethan almost laughs. No, Belle, he said. You love what I offer you. Stability, money, image. You love the me that doesn't know what you're doing. She finally cried, sobbing silently. Ethan didn't interrupt her or comfort her. I don't know what to do, she broke off in a sob. I made a mistake. You'll get a package by 9 a.m., Ethan said calmly. What? Delivered to your suite. Kind words from the hotel manager. Open it and go through everything inside. Then pack your things and check out. You'll be flying home alone. She sniffled. What's in there? Reality. Ethan said. Something you've been trying to escape. I can make it right, she pleaded. Please, I know I've hurt you, but I'll do anything. Tell me how I can undo this. You can't, Ethan said. It's not just about hurting anymore. It's about, when you think I'm not watching, who you choose to be. But I didn't mean to fall in love with him. She whispered. Finally, the truth came out. Ethan didn't even flinch. Belle, he said slowly, you chose him. You booked your plane ticket. You packed your bags. You shared the bed. You financed the fantasy with my card. This wasn't just happening. It was effort. It was intent. Silence. Then, in the faintest voice he had ever heard from her, I'm afraid. You should be afraid. The line was quiet for a long time. Ethan could hear her breathing. Maybe she thought he'd go soft. Maybe she thought he'd say, go home, or we'll work it out. But he had. And she, in his solution, no longer had a place. I have to hang up, he said. Wait. But he hung up. Afterward, Ethan stood in the silence of the house for a long time. The walls seemed a little wider, the air a little fresher, as if the house had been holding its breath too, and now, at last, it was free to exhale. He walked downstairs, made a fresh cup of coffee, and brought it out onto the porch. The sky was tinting gold, and birds were chirping in the trees. For the first time in a long time, he felt an inner peace. No more speculation, no more doubts, just the truth. He didn't need to win by yelling and screaming. All he had to do was stop pretending she was the person he never intended to be. Soon, when she opens that package, she'll realize how much pretending has cost her. The sun rises as usual in Honolulu, calm, golden, and full of promise. But for Isabel, this morning was destined to be different. Ethan imagined her waking up in a luxury suite. The ocean breeze slipping in through the cracks in the curtains, the faint sound of waves in the distance. Maybe for a moment she even forgot everything that had happened. Maybe she reached out and touched the empty seat beside her, looking for Julian. Maybe she still hoped it was just a bad dream. But the nightmare, it won't come with a legal document. At 9 a.m. sharp, Malik did as they had agreed. He walked up to the door of Isabel's suite, knocked twice, and handed her a second envelope. This one, heavier than the last. He didn't say a word, just smiled politely, then turned to leave. That envelope held the end of everything she thought she controlled. The divorce agreement was printed on stiff white paper with the bold insignia of Tony's law firm and bolded headings at the top. The agreement detailed every act of perfidy, every financial abuse, and all the legal grounds for his termination of the marriage. No sensationalism, just facts. Enclosed was a formal restraining order prohibiting her from accessing all joint accounts, investments, and property ownership. Tony's team had frozen everything: the house, the cars, even the assets of Isabel's startup. Now Isabel can't touch anything they've built together. The envelope also included an itemized list, a complete spreadsheet, color-coded in different colors, of every penny she'd spent in his name. It contained receipts from resorts, restaurant bills, purchases from designer brand stores, and even a small gas station receipt. Each line was like a nail in a coffin. Joan had done such a great job of organizing it all that the document looked more like a prosecution case file than a document. But what really mattered, the one that would take her breath away, was the last item in the envelope: a small black flash drive, clearly labeled. On the flash drive are video clips. For separate clips, each with a date and time stamp recorded by Malik's security system. There were no blurs, no arguably low-resolution images. The kiss under the tiki torches, the hand on her thigh on the pool lounger, the way she giggled against Julian at the Hawaiian dinner party, and the intimacy of her burying her face in the crook of his neck as they walked back to the suite at night, everything was clearly recorded. And he, Julian, was similarly exposed. That was the part she hadn't considered. Julian worked for a company in San Diego that Isabel had told Ethan was fairly conservative and stereotypical, known for firing employees involved in office romances or socially inappropriate behavior. She never thought Ethan would find out the truth, never thought Malik would track down the footage, never imagined Ethan would make it this far. But he did, because love was no longer the point. Dignity was. About 30 minutes after Malik delivered the envelope, Ethan got a call from him. "You're not going to believe what just happened," Malik said, half amused. "Tell me about it," Ethan replied. She stormed down to the lobby with that envelope, furious, like it had bitten her, and demanded to see management. Then she demanded to see me. "You met her?" "I met her outside the gates," Malik said, "and she started yelling and asking me if I had joined forces with you. She said it was an invasion of privacy. I told her to talk. Wise." Then Julian came out. He looked terrified. I think he saw the video. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "He knows." "Oh yes." The look on his face says it all. He's not angry, he's fearful, probably realizing what consequences he's about to face. "Very good." There they were, arguing in front of everyone. Malik continued. "And she said something about making amends. He said something about lawyering up. Then he just walked away. Didn't even wait for her." That part doesn't surprise Ethan. Isabel traded 6 years of her real life for 6 days of make-believe. And now all that's left in her hands is an envelope full of truth and a name no one wants to be associated with anymore. Later that day, Ethan received an email from Tony's assistant. Everything had been submitted for filing. The claim is validated. All documents were notarized and verified. He was now granted legal separation pending trial and a strong case for financial misconduct. As for the startup Ethan had helped Isabel launch, he had long since removed her from the account. She hadn't read those fine print clauses carefully when the LLC was first formed, and Ethan had retained a 60% majority stake, a standard protection in case she wanted to sell her shares early in the future. He'd never expected to tap into it in this way, but now it felt like a timely insurance policy. Later that evening, Ethan sent a termination notice to her company email address, effective immediately. She was out. No longer CEO, no longer a partner, no longer associated with anything he had built. The final death blow came when Malik told Ethan that Julian's company had received a copy of the forwarded video. It wasn't Ethan who sent it, of course. Rather, it was some anonymous person with an email headline that simply said, "Thought your HR department might want to take a look at this." Ethan didn't have to ask who sent it. Joan. She always had a precise sense of timing. By that night, the storm was in full swing, and Ethan stayed up late to finish a book he'd been trying to finish for months about how to quietly toughen up and rebuild in the aftermath of a storm. Interestingly, he now understands the implications better. His cell phone vibrated once more. A text message from an unknown number. Asterisk, please, can we talk? Just once, please. Ethan didn't reply. What else was there to say? She'd thrown gasoline all over their lives and lit a match, thinking he wouldn't notice the smoke. But now she was choking on the smoke she'd created. She lied to his face, spent his money, kissed another man on his brother's turf, and thought she could get out of it all by crying. Not this time. Ethan stepped out onto the balcony and breathed in the cool night air, letting it settle between his lungs. There was no more need for revenge. He had already won. Not through anger, not through violence, but through evidence, through calm, through truth. Let people say he's cold. Let them say he overreacted. Because in the end, she tried to erase him from the story they had written together. But he, holding that pen, she, on the other hand, has just been edited out. When Ethan stepped onto the plane home, he didn't feel the joy of victory, nor did he feel anger. What he felt was a strange calm, a silence like the dust settling after a storm, resting peacefully in his chest. He had not returned from the battlefield, but from a complete awakening. The man who had left a week ago was no longer the same man who walked into this house at this very moment. He walked calmly through the front door. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The shoes were neatly placed by the door, and the vase with dried lavender on the dining room table remained intact. But the energy of the space had changed. This was no longer their home. It was his home, completely and irrevocably his. Even before opening the suitcase, Ethan did what had to be done. First, he changed the locks on the door. The locksmith arrived within the hour. Ethan didn't explain why, nor did he need to. The locksmith simply finished the job, collected his money, nodded at him, and left him, brand new set of keys in hand, facing a brand new bolt that separated him from the past. Then he contacted the bank to finalize the financial split. Their joint account had long been frozen with Tony's help, but now he was going to make that freeze permanent. No more access, no more loopholes. Every penny accounted for, every transaction traced back to its source. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was ensuring inner peace. Then he cleaned the house. Not cleaning up the furniture or memories, just cleaning up her trail. Everything that belonged to Isabel, her clothes, her shoes, her makeup, her books, her favorite mug, even her yoga mat he packed up and put in the garage. He didn't throw anything away. That would have been too cheap for her. Instead, he put all the items neatly into labeled storage bins and left a simple note at the top. Asterisk collected, categorized, and claimed. You may coordinate retrieval through your attorney. Asterisk. He didn't need her to step foot in the house again. She'd already stepped in enough mud on his trusty floor. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. It was a courier delivering a stack of papers, a response signed by her legal team. She hadn't directly opposed the divorce, at least not yet. But the reply was carefully and elaborately worded, meant to stall for time. It's too late. The next morning, she flew back alone. Malik texted Ethan the moment she checked out. She's leaving today? First class. No Julian. Ethan didn't reply, nor did he need to. But he knew the storm was about to move in from Hawaii. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, she was standing outside the front door, as if she'd forgotten she no longer lived here. She wore sunglasses. Her hair was tied back in a tight bun at the back of her head, and she had that same duffel bag she'd taken to Hawaii slung over her shoulder as if nothing had changed. She rang the doorbell twice. Ethan watched her through the surveillance in the upstairs hallway. He didn't rush to respond, letting her stand there, letting her feel the weight of the weight. Then he pressed the button on the intercom. Isabel. She looked around in confusion. Can you open the door? The property is no longer shared property. Ethan's voice came out smoothly. And you will receive further instructions through your solicitor. Her face immediately changed. Wait. Are you serious? I flew back here to try and settle this. You flew back alone, Ethan said. That was your first clue. She approached the door. Please, let me in. We can talk. There's nothing more to talk about. Don't. You're not serious. You said you needed space. I was in Hawaii, with another man, occupying that space. That was a mistake. No. Ethan interrupted her. That's a pattern. He paused. You're the one who ruined it, Belle. It wasn't just one time. It wasn't just one kiss. Every day of that trip, you were making choices. And now, you're facing the cost. She was visibly shaking. We all make mistakes. Yes, people make mistakes. Ethan agreed. But not everyone betrays the one who gave them everything. A heavy silence ensued. Then, with a sob in her voice, the neighbors are watching. Ethan looked down from the window. Sure enough, old Mrs. Callahan across the street stopped her watering act. A man running with his dog slowed down to glance at it. Even the mailman looked twice before returning to his mail truck. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, Ethan said. You made this public the moment you try to hide it. Her lips quivered. You really hate me now, don't you? No, Ethan replied. Hating takes too much energy, and I, for one, no longer want to give you any of mine. He ended the intercom call. She stood outside the door for another 30 seconds. Then she walked to the curb, where the internet car she'd ordered was still waiting. She got into the car and didn't look back. That night, her parents called. Ethan hesitated to answer, but curiosity got the better of him. Hey, he said. After a brief hesitation, her mother's voice came through, tight and anxious. Hello. We heard everything. We just want to hear your side of the story. You want my word? Yes, her father added. Isabel is upset. She says things aren't what they seem. Things are never what they seem, Ethan said. She went to Hawaii with another man. She used my bank card. She booked the suite in my name. She lied to all of us. If you're looking for sympathy, that person isn't me. A long silence. I'm so sorry, her mother concluded. We didn't know. No, Ethan replied. You guys just didn't ask. He hung up the phone. He didn't know them an explanation, especially after they'd spent the last 6 years turning a blind eye to the rift she'd caused and calling it personality. That night, Ethan sat on the back patio with a glass of water and watched the sky turn orange. They used to sit under this sky together, laughing at boring TV shows and envisioning their future. Now, sitting here alone, for the first time, he didn't feel empty. Instead, he felt it was well-deserved. The house was no longer filled with tension. No more walking on thin ice. No more worrying about late-night texts she received that he shouldn't have seen. No more keeping an eye out for the phone calls that ended abruptly when he walked into the room. There is only silence. And when the silence finally becomes honest, it is the loudest piece of all. Ethan walked back inside, past the row of labeled boxes in the garage, and closed the door behind her. She'd come back here thinking she could fix everything with words. But there are some bridges that, once burned, are clean and complete, leaving no wreckage to cross. A month later, Ethan stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. He wore a charcoal gray suit and held only a leather folder in his hand, his demeanor calm and determined. The hallway hummed with the shuffling of feet, muffled conversations, and the occasional reminder to call for silence. But it all became a blur of background noise as he stood waiting by the bench. Isabel was 5 minutes late. She looked a far cry from the woman who'd stepped onto a Hawaiian beach in a beach dress and sunglasses. Today, she wore a navy blue dress, her hair tied back in a bun, and a heavy expression on her face that was somewhere between remorse and stubbornness. Beside her stood a savvy-looking lawyer, carrying an expensive briefcase and wearing the kind of professional fake smile that only comes out in courtrooms and in exorbitantly charged divorce cases. She didn't meet Ethan's eyes. Ethan didn't care. His lawyer, Tony, stood beside him with quiet confidence, flipping through the papers as if he had predicted the end. When the court clerk called their case, they walked into the courtroom and sat down at 2 separate tables, facing each other across the aisle. The judge was a middle-aged woman with eyes as sharp as steel and a reputation for disliking needlessly dramatic scenes. It was exactly what Ethan had hoped for. Tony began the trial with a calm statement summarizing the case: financial misconduct, betrayal of marital trust, and fraudulent use of joint assets. She spoke clearly, using dates, receipts, bank statements, and the sealed video evidence they presented as support. Isabel's attorney tried to counter with an emotional appeal. Your Honor, he said, my client admits to making a mistake, but it was not an elaborate scheme to intentionally harm her husband. It was the result of emotional detachment in the marriage. My client felt isolated, neglected, and alone. Yes, she misbehaved, but not out of malice. Isabel bowed her head, as if the weight of those words were too much to bear. The judge's face was expressionless. Tony stood up calmly. Your Honor, feeling neglected does not justify stealing a spouse's identity and financial accounts to finance an adulterous vacation. My client has provided evidence of premeditation, booking details, repeat booking records, and video footage showing an ongoing romantic relationship with another man. This was not a whim. It was a pattern. The judge nodded and flipped through the papers. Then she turns to Isabel. Mrs. Thorne, do you deny traveling to Hawaii with another man and using your husband's financial information? Isabel looked up, her voice barely audible. No denial, Your Honor. Do you deny that the rooms, meals, and gifts were charged to your husband's account without his consent? Again, no denial, Your Honor. Do you deny that during this trip you described yourself as being in an unmarried state on the official travel documents you submitted to the resort and tour company? Her attorney tried to interject, but the judge raised his hand to stop it. I want to hear it from her own mouth. Isabel hesitated, then shook her head. I don't deny it. The judge nodded and leaned back in his chair. Thanks. Tony stood up again and presented his final exhibit. My written statement. The judge read it silently for a moment, then set it aside. My turn, then. Do you have anything to say? The judge asked. Ethan stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked slowly toward the witness stand. He doesn't look at Isabel once. His gaze is always forward, his voice steady. I was married for 6 years to a woman I thought I knew. I supported her through graduate school, paid off her debt, and helped her start her own company. I carefully, brick by brick, built our life. Then one day, without warning, she grabbed a sledgehammer and smashed it all together and laughed as if it was an exercise in self-care. Some people in the gallery moved their bodies. Ethan continued. She planned a trip with another man. She lied to my face. She used our joint funds, my money, to finance a vacation she called a business trip. She used someone else's identity to buy jewelry for someone else. She committed both financial betrayal and emotional abandonment in one action. He paused. When she was found out, she didn't apologize. She didn't go home and confess. She just panicked because her illusions were shattered. He finally turned his head slightly enough to catch a glimpse of her. You had 6 years to work things out, he said softly. And you chose a 5-day trip to give up a lifetime. He stepped back, nodded to the judge, and returned to his seat. The courtroom was silent. The judge adjusted her glasses, took another look at the mountain of evidence, and then announced her ruling. The court finds that the evidence overwhelmingly favors the plaintiff's side, she said firmly, and the divorce is effective immediately. The home, bank assets, and startup company will all be awarded to the plaintiff. In addition, the defendant will be required to repay the documented $7,200 in misused funds. Isabel's attorney tried to argue for a reduction in the reimbursement amount. The judge interrupted him. This is not a trial about an emotional debate. The law is clear. Fraud. There must be consequences. Isabel's shoulders slumped. She didn't say a word. Outside the courtroom, Ethan waited near the elevator for a while. Not waiting for her, but because Tony had walked down the hallway to answer a phone call, and he needed to sign one last document. Isabel eventually made her way over. Alone, Ethan glanced at her. She looked tired. Not the sleep-deprived kind of tired, but the kind of weariness that comes from carrying a story that eventually falls apart. Can I have a word? She asked. You just said that in court. I mean, she frowned. I didn't mean for this to happen. Ethan turned fully toward her. That's the thing, he said. You never do anything on purpose. You just let things happen until you can't hide them anymore. I'm confused. She said weakly. No, you're not being honest. I thought maybe after a while. There is no later, Belle. She lowered her head as if she had expected this answer. Her voice grew weak again. Did you ever love me? Ethan didn't flinch. Loved. Loved it with all my heart. And you? You turned it into a pile of legal papers. Her eyes were moist, but he didn't comfort her. That time had passed. She opened her mouth to say something else, but Ethan walked past her, the elevator dinged, and Tony returned, handed him the signed papers, and they left together. Ethan didn't look back. That night, Ethan opened a bottle of red wine and stood on his balcony once again. The wind was picking up and the air seemed different. Somewhere in the city, Isabel would tell her version of the story. Maybe to a friend, maybe to some new acquaintance, maybe even to herself. But he didn't care anymore. Because that important story, the one that contained truth, evidence, and complete closure, was over. He walked into the courtroom with the facts and walked out with his freedom. There was no screaming, No slamming of doors, no dramatic exit. There was only the clear sound of closure and the knowledge that he had rebuilt with dignity everything she had tried to destroy. His life had been rewritten. It's funny how calmness comes, often quietly. It doesn't come with a boisterous fanfare. It doesn't knock on your door like a grand entrance, and it doesn't deliver balloons. It just descends quietly, like a breeze through an open window, a gentle reminder that the storm has passed. That's how Ethan felt the first time he woke up in his new apartment. The sun was streaming through the cracks in the blinds, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floors. His dog, yes, he finally got a dog named Milo, a stubborn little rescue mix, was currently curled up at the foot of the bed, snoring softly. Milo liked to hog the blankets and bark at himself in the mirror. Somehow, his presence fills the space with life and makes it real, as if Ethan is not just surviving, but healing. The apartment was small, one bedroom, a den, open kitchen, but everything in it belonged to him. Each item was handpicked and brought by him and had a meaning. The framed photos on the shelves were of friends, trips, and family. There are no wedding photos, no group photos with forced smiles, just himself framed in those real moments that don't need to be acted out. A few weeks after the court's decision, Ethan officially moved out of the house that he and Isabel had once owned together. Even though the judge awarded him the house, he didn't fight to stay. He didn't want to live in a museum full of broken memories. He sold the house, and for a good price. The buyers were a young couple, newlyweds, excited about the new life they were about to start. Ethan gave them the house to fill that space with hope, not history. Isabel did not contest the sale of the house. She said little more after the judgment. Ethan, on the other hand, is starting his life over. He resumed his Sunday riding habit, just as he had before he met her. Just himself and the wind, riding along the riverside trails with no destination and no schedule. He discovered new cafes, met his neighbors, signed up for a Thursday night cooking class for the first time in years. He didn't have to consider anyone else's taste preferences. He stopped checking her social media, stopped scrolling through the tagged photos trying to spy on who she was with or what excuses she was making up to the world again. That chapter had been completely turned over, and rereading it wouldn't change the ending. Instead, he and Malik were now in more frequent contact. The ordeal had brought the two brothers closer than all the birthday and holiday greetings of years past combined. They could now laugh about the details that had stung. "You should have seen the look on her face when she got that envelope," Malik said on the phone at one point. It was like someone handed her a grenade with the string pulled. A few weeks later, Malik came to visit him. They had dinner on the roof terrace of a local restaurant and just talked. There was no tension, no rushed debriefing, just two brothers who had been through an ugly incident and were stronger for it. "You've changed," Malik said as he took a sip of his beer. "Getting better or worse?" "Even better," Malik replied. "You look much more relaxed, like you're finally breathing smoothly." Ethan nodded. "It does feel that way." And then there's Tony. What started as a purely professional relationship slowly and unknowingly grew into something Ethan hadn't anticipated. After the case was over, they still kept in touch. At first it was about the handover of documents, but gradually they talked about their lives. One night, they sipped at a quiet bar in the center of town. Away from the courtroom, she looked different, more relaxed, warmer. Her sharpness was still there, but softened by a genuine curiosity. She asked him how he was doing, not in the polite way, but she really wanted to know. "I'm relearning how to be selfish a little bit," Ethan told her. She smiled. "Good. You deserve this." By the end of that night, Ethan realized he hadn't once thought of Isabel. Not of her lies, not of the videos, not of the voice that had convinced him she would never hurt him. There was only himself and the woman sitting across from him, sipping her wine and smiling without pretense. It didn't develop into anything overnight. Ethan didn't commit to a rebound relationship or force himself into a romantic relationship. He let it develop naturally, like healing is supposed to, slow, steady, and respectful. Maybe this would develop into a deeper relationship, maybe not. But for the first time, he was open to the uncertainty. One Saturday morning, Ethan went to the place he used to frequent with Isabel in the good old days, a quiet park overlooking the city skyline. He sat alone on a bench and watched the wind blow the fallen leaves across the path. He remembered everything she had taken from him and everything he had taken back. She had taken his trust, and he had taken it back by setting boundaries. She squandered his possessions, and he rebuilt them with will and planning. She trampled his dignity, and he responded to her betrayal with grace, strategy, and silence. It's often said that it's never too late for a gentleman to get cold feet. But Ethan doesn't agree. The best revenge is to live a peaceful life so complete, so justified, that the person who tries to destroy you ends up being haunted by the fact that he or she was so insignificant in the other person's long life. Isabel had called him once a few weeks after the court's decision. Ethan didn't answer. She left a voicemail, which Ethan later listened to. It was full of belated apologies and self-pitying defenses. Ethan listened to it and deleted it. He thought of Joan, the cybersecurity expert who had helped him track his finances and maybe even send the video to Julian's company, anonymously. Ethan later sent her a nice check and a thank you note. Joan replied with a brief email. "You're welcome. You were part of my streak of good fortune this year. Helping you has given me a sense of purpose." He also thought of Tony. After confirming the paperwork one last time, she looked at him and said, "You saved yourself, Ethan. I just handed you the flashlight." Ethan pondered those words long after he hung up. Because she was right. He could have chosen anger. He could have destroyed everything in front of him just to feel powerful again. But instead, he chose clarity. He created spreadsheets instead of engaging in pointless bickering. He chose the courtroom instead of creating chaos. In having all the reasons to explode, he chose dignity. Because of this, he didn't just survive the betrayal. He redefined himself through it. Now, when someone asks what happened between them, Ethan no longer tells the full story. He doesn't list the lies, the expenses, or the beach photos. He simply says it. "She left thinking she'd found something better. I stayed and found peace." That's enough. Because he didn't need to explain to the world how he was healed. He only needs to be accountable to himself, proud of the truth of what he endured and how he overcame it all. So here he is, 39, divorced, rebuilding his life and happier than he'd ever been in that marriage. Some people chase beaches while burning bridges. Ethan, on the other hand, had learned to build on solid ground. No more borrowed trust, no more forced smiles, no more false forever. Just him, his dog, a view of the city skyline, and a quiet certainty that he would never again let anyone, ever, erase him from his story. Even for the so-called heaven. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.